There comes a moment in life, often somewhere between your last gray hair and your first unapologetic no, when it hits you. Not every question deserves a response. Some questions aren't coming from genuine interest. They're veiled traps disguised as care, sweet-sounding guilt bombs that start with, "Why don't you?" and end with you second-guessing your peace, your quiet, or your right to live on your own terms. And the older you get, the more of these you'll hear, usually from those who say they love you but can't accept that you've stopped living on their schedule. This video is your armor. We're unpacking the 7 questions that older adults are most often asked, and why the wisest answer may be silence. These questions sound polite, but they're often subtle traps, rooted in expectation, fear, and control. From Margot, who finally stopped showing up out of obligation or responding to any of them, to Gerald, who bought a motorcycle without asking for permission, to Esther, who chose the quiet path of solitude over shallow noise, as well as not responding to any of her friends, to Harold, who writes poetry and builds birdhouses instead of chasing titles, and Charles, who learned to play piano at 68 just because he wanted to. Each story is a quiet act of rebellion, a stoic refusal to be defined by guilt, pressure, or outdated scripts. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." So sit back, take a deep breath, and let's talk about what doesn't need to be explained anymore. Question 1. Why don't you come around more often? At first glance, this question feels innocent, maybe even warm. Why don't you come around more often? It's the kind of thing family members or old friends say with a smile, as though it's a gentle nudge back into connection. But if you've reached a certain age, if you've spent your life giving, showing up, being available on demand, then you begin to hear it differently. You recognize what's really beneath it: a subtle accusation, a quiet entitlement, a discomfort not with your absence, but with your boundaries. It's not always love that asks this question. Often it's habit. It's the expectation that you are still the same person who never said no, who always brought the casserole, who always picked up the phone. But something happens as we grow older. Or rather, something should. A moment arrives when you stop equating presence with love. You stop confusing availability with value. And that moment is where freedom begins. I met a retired school teacher named Margot in a community journaling circle. In her 70s, she looked younger, not in her face, but in her spirit. She had a calmness about her, like someone who had stopped running for things that didn't matter. During one of our sessions, the topic of boundaries came up, and Margot shared her story. For years, she had spent every Sunday bouncing between family members, helping her daughter with groceries, attending her niece's potluck, checking in on her sister-in-law. It was endless, and no one ever asked if she wanted to. It was simply expected. Then one Sunday, she stayed home. No crisis, no illness, just a day to herself. She read, took a nap, watched the rain. That evening, her niece texted her, but instead of warmth or concern, the message was laced with subtle disappointment. "Is everything okay? Why are you pulling away from us?" Margot didn't respond that night. She sat in silence and she cried, not from guilt, but from clarity. She realized that her presence had become a product. It was being consumed, not cherished. She said, "I wasn't missed out of love, I was missed out of habit." And in that moment, she chose herself. This is what the Stoics call eudaimonia, a flourishing life aligned with inner truth, not outer demands. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "To live in harmony with yourself is to live in harmony with the universe." But that harmony doesn't come by being endlessly available. It comes by retreating inward, setting boundaries, and protecting your energy as sacred. Another woman I know, Elaine, went through something similar. For decades, she was the glue of her extended family, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who organized gatherings, the one who cleaned up when others had gone. But by the time she turned 68, she felt like she was living her life in service to a routine that no longer served her. That year, she stopped going. No announcements, no drama. She just didn't show up at the next birthday or the next Sunday dinner. When her cousin Linda finally called and asked, "Why don't you come around more often?" That old familiar question, Elaine smiled gently and said, "I've been resting." What she didn't say was this: she had grown tired of being somewhere she wasn't seen, tired of being counted on but never counted with, tired of hearing others speak but never being heard. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done. The Stoics spoke often of ataraxia, inner stillness, a calm that cannot be disturbed by external noise. It is not passivity, but power. Elaine wasn't withdrawing from life. She was finally engaging with her life. As Seneca said, associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving. The process is mutual. But what if your presence is always used, never nurtured? What if your time is demanded, never respected? Then the Stoic response is clear: withdraw without explanation. You don't owe access to anyone who only values your utility. The guilt many people feel for pulling away later in life is not because they've done something wrong. It's because for the first time, they're doing something right. We've been conditioned to believe that love means constant presence, but always being available is not noble. It's draining, it's unsustainable. And in truth, the people who expect you to show up are often thinking more about their comfort than your well-being. They don't see the toll it takes. They don't ask how you're feeling. They just ask where you were. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes not just a mindset, but a survival strategy. Epictetus taught, if you want to be free, don't wish for things to happen as you want them. Wish for things to happen as they do, and you will be content. The older we get, the more we must accept that freedom comes not from being loved by everyone, but from being true to ourselves. So the next time someone asks, "Why don't you come around anymore?" Pause, breathe. Remember that you are not a service. You are not a ritual. You are a soul that deserves rest, respect, and recognition. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a dose of Stoic wisdom. Share this with someone who's learning to protect their peace and live life on their own terms. Leave a comment below. Which of these questions have you faced? And how did you respond? Remember, you owe no one an explanation for your joy, your rest, or your silence. This channel is here to remind you, your later years are not an ending. They're your liberation. Stay grounded, stay quiet, stay powerful. Question 2. What do you spend your money on? Did you know that nearly 60% of retirees in the US report feeling guilty when they spend money on themselves, even when all their essential needs are fully met? That's not about income. That's about identity. It reveals the quiet conditioning that follows a lifetime of sacrifice, especially for those who spent decades raising families, serving communities, or working jobs where their name never made the credits. Somewhere along the line, your money stopped being yours. It turned into an invisible safety net for everyone around you, your children, your grandchildren, your siblings, even distant relatives. You became the silent emergency fund, the fallback plan, the generous helper who never really asked for much. And for many, even the thought of spending money on yourself feels wrong. Until one day, you decide to do something different. That was the case with Gerald, a retired postmaster who had just turned 70. For most of his life, Gerald was the dependable one, the man who always said yes when someone needed a little help, be it $50, $500, or just time. But after the passing of his wife, something shifted in him. The house felt quieter, his thoughts felt louder, and for the first time in decades, he asked himself, "What do I want?" The answer surprised him. A motorcycle. Not a flashy one, Not something reckless, just a modest cruiser, something he'd always dreamed of owning since his 20s, but never dared to pursue. He had always put those dreams on hold, for bills, for braces, for college tuition, for rainy days that always seemed to come. So one spring morning, Gerald walked into a local dealership and bought the bike, paid in full. No apologies, no consultation. But the backlash was swift. His oldest son called him that evening. "Dad, a motorcycle? Really? At your age? Couldn't you have used that money for something more practical?" Gerald didn't argue. He simply said, "I've paid for plenty of practical in my life. This one's for me." From a Stoic perspective, Gerald wasn't being selfish. He was finally being wise. Stoicism doesn't glorify wealth, but it also doesn't condemn joy. Seneca wrote, "Wealth is the slave of a wise man and the master of a fool." In other words, money is neither virtue nor vice. It is a neutral tool. What defines it is your intention. The guilt many seniors feel when they spend on themselves isn't a reflection of moral clarity. It's a residue of over-functioning. It's what happens when your self-worth has been tied to being needed for so long that your own needs feel like a betrayal. But Marcus Aurelius reminds us, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When you shift that mindset, money becomes something else. Not a tether to guilt, but a quiet statement of ownership. A reflection of years survived, endured, and earned. A language of autonomy. You are not obligated to explain why you bought a new mattress instead of saving that money for the kids. You don't owe anyone an account of why you chose to take a solo weekend trip or enroll in a painting class that costs too much. What people call indulgence, you can call restoration. And what some see as unnecessary, you know is essential. For your joy, your peace, your spirit. In fact, the very idea that older adults must always defer their desires for the sake of others is rooted in a scarcity mentality. But Stoicism teaches abundance of the inner kind. Clarity, presence, peace. Epictetus said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." That doesn't mean you should live in deprivation. It means you should want wisely. And sometimes, what you want, a little beauty, a little thrill, a little break from the routine, is precisely what you need. So when someone asks, "What do you spend your money on?" especially with that undertone of judgment, you don't have to answer. Not because you're hiding anything, but because you've outgrown the need for permission. Let your silence be your strength. Let your joy speak through your actions. Because here's the truth. Every dollar you spend in alignment with your peace is a step toward freedom. And freedom is not something you owe the world an explanation for. It's something you claim, quietly, intentionally, and fully. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a dose of Stoic wisdom. Share this with someone who's learning to protect their peace and live life on their own terms. Leave a comment below. Which of these questions have you faced? And how did you respond? Remember, you owe no one an explanation for your joy, your rest, or your silence. This channel is here to remind you, your later years are not an ending. They're your liberation. Stay grounded, stay quiet, stay powerful. Question 3. Don't you feel lonely living like that? There comes a point in life when silence isn't empty. It's full of clarity, full of peace, full of the power that comes from no longer needing to explain yourself to people who were never truly listening. And yet, one of the most common and cutting questions many older adults face sounds gentle on the surface. Don't you feel lonely living like that? It stings not because it's true, but because it challenges the calm you've worked so hard to build. The world equates solitude with sadness. It assumes that a quiet room must be an empty one. But what if that stillness is sacred? What if, after a lifetime of obligations, constant noise, and being everything to everyone, you've finally chosen yourself? And with that choice came peace? There's a powerful difference between isolation and solitude. One feels like a cage. The other feels like coming home. The people who ask this question often project their own discomfort, not with you, but with themselves. They're unsettled by your quiet because they've never made peace with their own. They confuse being surrounded with being fulfilled. But Stoicism teaches that true freedom doesn't come from the crowd. It comes from mastering your inner world. It comes from choosing your pace, your space, your path. And yes, when you choose solitude, you will be questioned. People may worry, some may judge, others may whisper, and at times you may even doubt yourself. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're doing something most people are too afraid to try: living on your own terms. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, "It is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." The opinion that solitude equals suffering is simply that, an opinion, not a truth. Your life does not require validation through noise. Your contentment is not less real because it is quiet. I once met a woman named Esther at a small philosophy group held at the local library. She was 73, a retired landscape architect, and one of the calmest people I've ever encountered. Esther lived alone in a small cottage by the edge of town, surrounded by gardens she had built herself. She rarely entertained guests. She didn't go to family barbecues. She didn't keep her phone within reach. And yet, when she spoke, it was like listening to still water, deep, reflective, undisturbed. One evening after the meeting, someone asked her that familiar question, "Don't you feel lonely, living out there all by yourself?" Esther just smiled and replied, "I did once, but that was when I was surrounded by people who didn't know how to listen." She went on to explain how for decades she played the role, the daughter, the wife, the host, the friend. She was always available, always giving, always trying to meet expectations. Her life was full of people, and yet she said, "I've never felt more unseen." After her husband passed and her children moved away, she thought the silence would crush her. But instead it healed her. The garden became her companion. The wind became her soundtrack. The books on her shelf began to speak more clearly than the voices that had once filled her house. Seneca wrote, "The primary indication of a well-ordered mind is a man's ability to remain in one place and linger in his own company." Esther had discovered this firsthand. She had gone from fearing solitude to treasuring it, from resisting silence to embracing its wisdom. She wasn't lonely, she was rooted. So the next time someone asks you, "Don't you feel lonely?" understand that the question says more about them than about you. It reflects a world afraid of quiet, addicted to noise, and unsure of how to exist without constant external validation. But your stillness is not a void. It is a vessel for thought, for renewal, for presence. It is the space where the soul exhales and the mind returns to itself. You don't owe anyone a performance of happiness. You don't need to fill your life with noise to make it count. Let your peace speak for itself. Let your absence from chaos be a declaration of self-respect. Because you are not lonely. You are full. You are not missing out. You are finally arriving. And in the quiet of your own life, you are discovering something rare. The kind of strength that no longer looks like loudness. It looks like stillness. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a dose of Stoic wisdom. Share this with someone who's learning to protect their peace and live life on their own terms. Leave a comment below. Which of these questions have you faced? And how did you respond? Remember, you owe no one an explanation for your joy, your rest, or your silence. This channel is here to remind you. Your later years are not an ending. They're your liberation. Stay grounded. Stay quiet. Stay powerful. Question 4. So what are you going to do with your life now? There's a kind of stillness that doesn't come from hiding. It comes from strength. It's the quiet presence of someone who no longer performs for the crowd. But ironically, that calm often invites the next wave of subtle pressure. Not loud, not aggressive. It arrives gently, almost politely, wrapped in what looks like concern. So, what are you going to do with your life now? It sounds like curiosity, but often it's something else entirely. A coded check-in to see if you're still following a script they understand, still chasing goals they can measure, still fitting into a version of success that makes them feel secure. Because if you've stopped striving, if you've stepped off the treadmill, it unsettles them. And here's the twist. Sometimes that question doesn't even come from others. It comes from you, that faint voice inside, the leftover echo from decades of productivity. That whisper, you should have a plan, a purpose, a clean answer. It's the residue of a life spent proving, producing, performing. We're trained to believe that unless our next chapter looks impressive on paper, it isn't valid. But the truth is, life isn't a resume. It's not a checklist. It's not a neat graph of upward success. It's messy. It's non-linear. Sometimes it's quiet. Often, it's beautiful. The danger isn't the question itself. It's the guilt we absorb when we don't have a headline-worthy response. That guilt convinces us to shrink our peace to make others comfortable. It pushes us to delay joy until we can label it. But the Stoics saw through that illusion. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask, "What's your grand plan?" He asked, "Are you doing the work that belongs to you today?" That's the real question. Not how your life looks to others. Not whether it earns applause, but whether it aligns with your values, with your soul, with your present. That's purpose, not performance, but presence. Let me tell you about Harold, a man I met during a train ride from New Jersey to Boston. He was in his mid-70s, wearing a canvas hat, sipping weak coffee, and writing in a little green notebook. We fell into conversation, and I asked him what he did. He chuckled and said, "Now or before?" Before retirement, Harold had been a logistics manager for a major shipping company. Tight schedules, global flights, thousands of moving parts. But now, "I make small things," he said, "birdhouses, garden signs, and I write haiku." That caught me off guard. "For anyone?" I asked. He smiled. "For no one." Harold had left behind the spreadsheets and meetings to tend a garden, whittle wood, and write poetry he didn't intend to publish. Some relatives didn't get it. His son asked him once, "So what are you doing with your life now?" in that half-curious, half-concerned tone. Harold replied, "I'm listening to birds and building homes for them." When his son looked puzzled, Harold added, "You don't always need to climb higher. Sometimes you just need to sit still and build something small that brings joy." Harold reminded me of Epictetus, who said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." His doing was no longer about status. It was about sincerity. He had found freedom not by producing more, but by being content with less. His life was no longer a race. It was a rhythm. So if you've been wrestling with that question, if even you don't know exactly what comes next, here's your permission to let that be okay. You're allowed to live in the unknown. You're allowed to not have a 5-year plan. You're allowed to do something that feels good without needing to justify it. And the next time someone asks you, "So what are you doing with your life now?" Pause. Don't rush to explain. Let the question hang in the air. Let them sit in their own need for clarity while you rest in your own. Because the most powerful answers are not spoken. They are lived. As Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it. Use it not for constant proving, but for quiet meaning. Not for future applause, but for present peace." Question 5. Don't you think it's a little late for that? Some words don't need to be shouted to leave scars. They come softly, wrapped in concern, but they land like a sentence passed on your courage. And one of the most paralyzing phrases you'll ever hear, especially as you get older, is this: "Don't you think it's a little late for that?" At first glance, it seems harmless, maybe even thoughtful, but underneath, it questions more than your goal. It questions your right to have one. It's the quiet voice of conformity disguised as care. It doesn't just challenge your dream. It attempts to kill it before it even lives. Maybe you've held on to a desire for decades, a book idea, a language you always wanted to learn, a place you dreamed of seeing. You finally gather the courage to act on it, speak it aloud, and someone close to you raises an eyebrow and says, "Really? At your age?" It doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from people afraid of their own unlived life. Their fear speaks through discouragement, but it's no less damaging. This is the lie we've been sold, that dreams have expiration dates, that our best chances are behind us, that if we didn't do it by 30, 40, 50, it no longer counts. But the Stoics would disagree. Seneca once wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live. There is no final draft of who you are. You are not finished until you stop breathing." Let me tell you about Charles, a man I met at a community storytelling night. He was 68, a quiet widower, soft-spoken and gentle. For most of his life, Charles had played supporting roles: a devoted husband, reliable father, dependable employee. He was never the center of attention, never chased much for himself. But beneath the surface lived a dream he'd carried since boyhood. He wanted to learn the piano. He'd never told many people. It seemed too small, too self-indulgent. And when he finally mentioned it aloud at a family dinner, just a passing comment, someone chuckled and said, "You? Learn piano now? Don't you think it's a little late for that?" And so, for a few more years, he didn't try. That one question had planted a seed of doubt that grew fast and wild. But then life shifted, as it often does when we lose someone. After his wife passed, Charles realized how many of his days had been spent doing things for others, out of love, yes, but also out of habit. He realized he had never given himself permission to pursue something just because it lit him up inside. One rainy afternoon, he walked into a thrift shop and saw a used digital keyboard propped against the wall. $30. He bought it, carried it home, and set it up in the corner of his living room. He didn't hire a teacher. He watched free YouTube videos. He practiced scales with trembling hands. He made mistakes. He smiled. He kept going. 6 months later, at a local potluck, he sat down and played Moon River. It wasn't perfect. His timing wobbled. His fingers slipped. But when he finished, the room erupted into applause. Not because it was a technical masterpiece, but because it was real, because it was brave, because it was proof that it's never too late. Charles told me afterward, "It was the first thing I've ever done just for myself, not to serve, not to fix, not to prove, just to feel alive." That's what Stoicism teaches us. Life isn't about external approval. It's about internal alignment. As Epictetus said, "How long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself?" The tragedy isn't starting late. It's never starting at all. The people who say it's too late are often speaking to themselves, not you. Don't let their fear become your boundary. The clock isn't your enemy. Regret is. And remember, time will pass anyway. You might as well spend it doing what wakes your soul. So the next time someone asks, "Don't you think it's a little late for that?" smile gently, then take one step forward, because living fully doesn't require being early. It just requires being awake. Question 6. Aren't you planning to leave something for your kids? Did you know that nearly 2/3 of retirees in the US report feeling guilty when they spend their own savings, not on extravagance, but simply on themselves? Not because they're broke, but because they've internalized a belief that their money isn't really theirs to enjoy, that its highest purpose is to benefit someone else, That belief isn't just financial, it's psychological. It's inherited like an invisible chain, passed quietly from one generation to the next. And that brings us to one of the most emotionally loaded questions an older adult can hear. Aren't you planning to leave something for your kids? On the surface, it sounds like a reasonable concern. But beneath it is a deeper, unspoken message. Your life still belongs to others. How much longer are you expected to carry the role of provider? How many more dreams will you postpone? How many simple joys will you deny because you're afraid of appearing selfish? Here's the truth. Most people don't say out loud. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's watching you come alive. It's your children seeing you laugh again, travel, dance, paint, do something just because. It's them witnessing what life looks like when it's not lived under obligation, but under freedom. But many never do. Too many elders sit in houses full of things, furniture, heirlooms, bank accounts, yet feel emotionally bankrupt. They've spent their final chapters in quiet sacrifice, living not for themselves, but for the fear of letting someone down. Seneca, the Stoic sage, said, "The wise man saves not for his heirs, but for his peace." And peace doesn't come from hoarding wealth. It comes from releasing guilt, from honoring the decades of labor, responsibility, and giving you've already lived. It means saying, "I've done enough. Now it's my turn." Because what your children inherit emotionally matters more than what they inherit financially. If all you leave them is money, but they never saw you truly alive, you haven't passed down a legacy. You've passed down fear. The belief that fulfillment is something to be postponed until it's too late. That's not love. That's quiet martyrdom. So if someone questions your right to enjoy the time and resources you've earned, don't argue. Don't justify. Live. Let your joy answer for you. Let your freedom be the final gift you give. Question 7. Why have you changed so much lately? There's a moment on the journey of becoming when the people closest to you stop seeing you clearly. Not because you've lost yourself, but because you've finally found yourself. And then comes the question, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp. Why have you changed so much lately? It's not really curiosity, it's control, dressed up as concern. It doesn't mean I miss the old you. It often means I miss the version of you that was more convenient. That's why this is the final and most revealing question in our series. Because when people ask it, what they're really mourning is not your change. They're mourning their hold on you. Let me tell you about June. She's 74, a widow, and spent her entire life as everyone's reliable helper. She raised 3 kids, cared for her husband through illness, and played peacekeeper in every room. She said yes to everything and everyone, except herself. Until one Friday afternoon, she dyed her hair silver. Not gray, silver. She canceled 3 weekly commitments, and she told her daughter, gently but firmly, that she wouldn't be babysitting that weekend. "I've got a jazz concert to catch," she said. The phone rang within the hour. Her daughter asked, "Mom, what's going on with you lately?" June didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just smiled and said, "Something good, finally." That moment? That's freedom. And that's exactly what so many fear. Because when you change, especially later in life, it confronts people. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something they haven't yet dared to do. You're no longer apologizing for saying no. You're no longer bending your soul to make others feel comfortable. And suddenly, the role you've always played, the agreeable one, the giver, the silent rock, doesn't fit anymore. That scares people, but it shouldn't scare you. As Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Because when you stop performing and start protecting your joy, it won't make sense to everyone. And it's not supposed to. Some people will guilt you. Some will fall away. But those who truly love you, they'll celebrate this return. not as a loss, but as a homecoming. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, what stands in the way becomes the way. And for many of us, the biggest obstacle to peace has never been conflict, it's been people-pleasing. That ends now, so the next time someone asks, "Why have you changed?" Don't justify, don't defend, just smile, because finally, you have. And if you've made it this far, you already know something most people never will. Silence isn't rudeness, it's sovereignty. It's the sound of a soul coming home. Drop the phrase, "My silence is my power," in the comments. Then hit subscribe, because this space, it's not for those still begging to be understood. It's for those who have decided to be free. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a dose of Stoic wisdom. Share this with someone who's learning to protect their peace and live life on their own terms. Leave a comment below. Which of these questions have you faced? And how did you respond? Remember, you owe no one an explanation for your joy, your rest, or your silence. This channel is here to remind you, your later years are not an ending. They're your liberation. Stay grounded, stay quiet, stay powerful.